Welcome, everybody. I'm thrilled and excited to have with us Len May. He is the CEO and co-founder of Endocanna Health. He has a master's in medical cannabis from the Institute for Advancement of Integrative Medicine. He has been published in several peer-reviewed publications. He has also developed with his team a patent technology for personalized endocannabinoid genotypes and more. He also has a podcast titled Everything is Personal. I'm thrilled to have you on PreZence this week because first of all, you're a very interesting person doing interesting things. And it's also a slightly different episode for us. We tend to have a lot of people in higher education and artists. So this is a wonderful opportunity for something a little bit different, but also for us to learn from you. So once again, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Cindy. I appreciate it.
There is a lot of information on cannabinoids, on CBD, on marijuana, but there's also a lot of misinformation. I'm hoping that you can educate us on this episode, myself included, because my own knowledge on the subject matter is not as expansive as yours. So I'm really excited to learn more and for us to break through some stereotypes and tropes that people sometimes associate with this industry and really get to the heart of the matter of what it is that you're doing. Before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
I think what I do doesn't define who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just an area of interest. And I'm also an artist. I like music. There's a whole bunch of things. But I think just for people to understand my background, I'm an immigrant. So I was born in Lithuania and my parents immigrated when it was under Soviet rule. My parents immigrated when I was about 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in Philadelphia. It was a really interesting time because, you know, we moved here. We got lumped into this whole thing of Russian. We're not even Russian, but people were, your mom wears combat boots, and it was all this thing because in 1980 there was this big Cold War. So it was an interesting way to grow up. There was a lot of violence around me. There was a lot of violence where I lived, in a working class kind of neighborhood. Eventually, my parents moved, and there was violence at home as well. So I had to deal with a lot of things, for my father, and my mother wasn't really. She wasn't really supportive of his discipline style, but never really did anything about it. And plus, I was the kind of kid that would sit in class and my teacher would call me and my brain was elsewhere. So I got diagnosed with ADD. It's probably before they had an H. So I don't remember being hyperactive. And they put me on prescription medication. I was hanging out with some older kids one day in school. Right before school started, they asked me if I want to smoke a cigarette. I was like, yeah, cool. I'm going to hang out with the older kids. We're going to smoke a cigarette. Mm-hmm. Sure, why not? And I found it weird they only had one cigarette. But I didn't think about it at that time. So they had one cigarette, they were passing around. It was like four of us, I think. And the cigarette came to me and I was dabbling and trying to, smoke cigarettes at that time. I inhaled it and it didn't taste like a cigarette. I coughed a little bit, inhaled again, and they're all laughing at me. So they put cannabis in the cigarette. But when I went back to class, sort of the windows that are open in my head narrowed and I could focus. So I didn't say anything to anybody, but I was able to eventually get off all my prescription medication, transition using cannabis medicine. And my parents weren't big fans of that. I kept getting caught, kept getting punished. And eventually my parents actually ended up kicking me out. But not only that, calling the cops to have me arrested. The irony of the whole story is my parents both consume products that we manufacture in our facility for, their conditions now. So it kind of came full circle. That's a little bit of background. And then, I lived in Philadelphia. I went to Temple University, worked in the music business, worked at, people probably don't remember Tower Records, but it was like incredible.
I remember Tower Records.
Yeah.
It's a generational thing, Len.
Exactly. So we used to have these stores. You go in and you buy
Mhm.
records and CDs and all that stuff. That was the way I worked through school at Tower Records. Doing music, buying and stuff, and also selling cannabis on the side to pay my way through school. And yes, it was illegal, but I didn't think that it was anything because it was medicine to me, and I thought maybe it's medicine to other people as well. And I went to this music festival called the Horde Music Festival, where I think Ziggy Marley, the Black Crows, Blues Traveler, a bunch of different bands were performing there. And walked around, I saw a banner for the Cannabis Action Network. There was these young people there. I came up. I'm like, "Hey, Cannabis Action, what are you guys doing?" Like, "We're registering people to vote." I'm like, "Cool. All right. Well, I'm already registered to vote. What else?" Like, "Well, we're registering people to vote." So I became the president of the Cannabis Action Network. That was my effort for really pushing legalization through. And I held a rally at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the Declaration of Independence is, and Constitution, Liberty Bell, and all that. And my keynote speaker was this woman. Her name is Elvie Masica. And Elvie was one of the first people to get federally prescribed cannabis under a NIDA program that they had. I think at the height they had 16 people, and there was 4 alive at that time. For those of you that don't know, the federal government actually has a patent on cannabis. They actually cultivate cannabis in University of Mississippi, and they distribute cannabis, even though
Wow,
it's a
I
Schedule
I
One
did
narcotic.
not know that.
Yeah. So even though it's a Schedule One, which means it has no medicinal properties, but then it does have medicinal properties because they have a patent on there, and they actually cultivate it for research purposes and prescribe it for those people that had those conditions. So anyway, LV had her USDA labeled
Mhm.
cannabis pre-rolled cigarette joints, and she lit up in front of the federal rangers. Nothing happened because she was legal. And this is back in 1993, 94.
Wow.
So I was like, wow, this is an incredible thing. And you're not getting arrested. It's going to be legal. Pennsylvania legalized only a few years ago. So it took a long time. But the crux of the story is that everybody stayed in my house afterwards, and we got woken up to a loud noise, something like breaking. And the girl I was dating at that time, she was an artist. So she made this sculpture in my house. It had spikes going all through that. And Alvy happened to walk into it and break into pieces. And she felt so bad. But
Mhm.
here's what happened. She then began to medicate with cannabis. So she has degenerative glaucoma. She cannot see. And only cannabis was her medicine. So I was like, wait a second. And she still wore glasses and everything, but she could see her glaucoma was alleviated at the time that she's consuming. So I was like, well, it's medicine for me, for my condition, but it's medicine for her condition. And I sort of started trying to dive a little bit deeper in why this sort of cannabis affects this person, and everybody has this different experience. And I'll get into all that as well. But then the girl who became my wife, who is now my ex-wife, she was telling me I have to get a real job. So I went to work for Price Waterhouse at the time, PwC, and I did some venture capital work. And then I worked as a commercial real estate broker, all that. And then I came to LA, and
Mhm.
I got back into the cannabis business. So in a nutshell, that's sort of my background.
That's really quite a fascinating background. And I think it's really interesting that early on you started to connotate cannabis with medicine, which is not something I did at that age. I very much so came from a very strict household, very conservative background. It was considered a big no, no, you don't do that. And I never once tried it when I was a teenager, not even in my 20s, and my 30s came around. I tried it and had a terrible reaction to it. So I was quite fascinated with what you're doing, which is basically DNA research and catering it to people, because you hear stories of people like me who never tried it in their life. And when they finally decide to try it, it is just a horrible experience. And we say, I'm never doing that again because I thought my heart was going to pop out and die. But even though I'm thinking that logically, I have read a lot of the research, and I do understand that there are a lot of benefits for a lot of people. So I'm sure you hear stories like mine and you get asked about, well, I had this experience or so and so had an experience. How do you address that? And how is this amazing research that you're doing with DNA helping people who have those types of reactions, if you will?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important for me to sort of set the table about what is the endocannabinoid system? What are we even talking about? And how does it even
Yes.
work in your body? But just to make a comment on what you said, it's interesting. So when we try something and we have an adverse reaction, we usually blame ourselves. I remember I drank way too much tequila in Acapulco when I was 19 years old, and I couldn't even smell tequila. Not for a second did I ever think about, let me call the tequila company or let me say tequila is just bad for you. It was about me. I consumed too much or, overdid something. And that's usually what people have when they have an adverse reaction to something. Usually it's just misaligned. They probably took too much and your body's overreacting to that. But with cannabis, we just blame the cannabis. And when we blame the cannabis, we're not even blaming a specific type. We're doing all of it across the board. And there's different varietals that may impact different people differently. So just to kind of explain what the endocannabinoid system is and how it works. So the endocannabinoid system is a primary modulating system. It actually regulates all the other systems within our bodies. And the way that it does that, it gets signals from the other systems like your immune system, your endocrine system, and it sends that signal up the central nervous system to the brain. And then the brain makes a determination which neurochemicals to be able to excrete. So it actually goes and regulates those other systems because the main idea is to maintain homeostasis, which is balance within your system. And the two endogenous means within that we produce ourselves, two endogenous endocannabinoids that we produce are called anandamide and 2-AG. So the word anan means bliss in Sanskrit. This is our bliss molecule. And this is what's secreted when, you hear the runner's high when people are running. That is anandamide that's secreted to your bloodstream. And so when we consume the plant phytocannabinoids, the converted phytocannabinoid that we all know, THC. So THC, every single molecule that comes from a plant has an acid molecule. So it's THCA. When you heat it, it actually drops the acid molecule and becomes delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC. Now, how it works in our bodies is it binds to receptors, which are called CB1 receptors, and releases anandamide. So when we have these receptors in our brain and our central nervous system, THC binds to that and releases anandamide. CBD, when we consume that in the decarboxylated form or without the acid molecule, it has an affinity for what's called the CB2 receptor, which is mostly located in our immune, digestive system, etc., which helps reduce inflammation, so on. So if we have deficiencies in our own endogenous endocannabinoid system, we're lucky we have a plant. That plant actually mimics and helps us subsidize what we're naturally not producing. Now, where people get in trouble is that, and then they're the main cannabinoids. There's, over 160 and there's over 400 different constituents in the plant. But the main things that actually make a difference are the cannabinoids. And we talk about THC because THC is intoxicating. It's the one that gets you high. It's the one that actually sends a signal through the vagus nerve to your digestive system that create more ghrelin, which gives us this appetite. But it's not an appetite for hunger. It's an appetite for being satiated. And what I mean by that is we have these cravings for sugar, salt, and fat when we consume THC. Nobody craves kale when they're high. That's not a munchy food, So it's these kind of things. And there's also essential oils in the plant. The essential oils are called terpenes. And these essential oils work together with the cannabinoids to produce an effect. So your audience may probably know like sativa and indica. These are all what we were taught for years and years. Sativa gives you that up and indica gives you that down sedative feel. But there's no such thing anymore. We've crossbred the plants so much that the way you determine the effect is based on the amount of cannabinoids that are in there and also what type of terpenes, what type of essential oils.
Can I interject for a quick second?
Sure.
So when you're saying that you don't see that anymore, is this something that's general to the industry, or is this something specific to your company? Because you do have a lot of scientists working on the right formula.
Yeah, it's industry specific because we took the plant and we crossbred it. And when we crossbreed the plant over and over and over, there's no such thing as what they refer to as land race. Land race means it came from the seed in Afghanistan or whatever, or in Kashmir or whatever the original, or Durban. It came from that seed, it grew. Now we crossbreed everything in labs. So we bred out the original strains or cannabis or chemical varieties. So now that there's all these hybrids, they call them. So it's a hybrid of each one. And basically, when we look at somebody's genetic predispositions, we're not looking at which cannabis is going to be right for you. We're looking at genetic predispositions that may actually be triggered epigenetically by consumption of something like cannabis specifically. So the idea is to help mitigate or avoid a possible adverse event. We also look at drug-to-drug interaction. There's a lot of interactions between different medications, cannabis and SSRIs, for instance, or blood thinner medication. In addition to that, dosing, which is hugely important, and we look at metabolic function, how we metabolize. If somebody's an ultra rapid metabolizer, well, they can consume a little bit more because they'll metabolize it quickly and excrete it. But if somebody's a poor metabolizer, then maybe they have a very long experience and it's prolonged, and it can be an intense experience. So that's really the idea. And I can get into a little bit more detail on that, but I just want to make one more analogy, and I'll pause for your next question. But drugs in general. So I think people are confused, and they're confused about, because we have all these preconceived notions about drugs based on what politicians tell us, because it's not really coming from medicine, it's coming from lawmakers. But cocaine is not, it has medicinal purposes. It's a Schedule II narcotic, while cannabis is a Schedule I narcotic. But the interesting thing about cocaine is I don't think people realize how it actually works in the body. And the reason why, it's not about the cocaine, it's about what happens in our body, because we have dopamine receptors. And when we consume cocaine, it binds to your dopamine receptors and squirts a bunch of dopamine and blocks the reuptake of that dopamine. So your brain is saying, oh, I want more of that. And it's going to start shutting down its own production of dopamine and keep sending you signals to give me more. So now you become dependent because your brain says, I want to conserve energy and give me this, whatever it is. So your actual dependence is not on the cocaine, it's on the dopamine. And it's just a ligand is just a way to be able to stimulate that production of dopamine. And the same thing with almost any, drug that we use. The difference is that there's a tremendous amount of adverse effects associated with cocaine versus cannabis that comes from plant. Both come from plant, but they're pharmaceutical grade, etc. I just want to put that out there so people understand.
Oh, I am absolutely fascinated with everything you're sharing with us, and I'm sure our listeners are too, because there's so much to learn on the subject. And as I said in the beginning, there's a lot of misconceptions, and I know I've certainly had my own, but I also remember the first time my views began to shift on the subject. Even though I have not been a consumer myself, I do remember having a very good friend who was HIV positive. And this is in the early 2000s when, cannabinoids were illegal in California. And I recall that one of the few things that could assist my friends was the cannabis. He had to take some really strong medications, and we're talking about the early 2000s. So the type of medications that were available back then for people who are or were HIV positive was very harsh on people's digestive system. And I remember my friend saying, Cindy, don't judge me, but this is one of the few things that help. I remember saying, okay, well, if it helps you, it helps you. And I visibly saw what a difference it made and how he was able to manage the pain. So that's when something went off in my brain saying, okay, well, maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. Like you said, it's what we're told by, politicians, or sometimes if you come from very conservative households, such as the type that I came from. And yet, what is so wonderful about having a guest such as yourself on our show is that you can educate us, and we can say, oh, maybe I don't know as much as I think I know. Maybe there's something for me to learn. Or maybe, as when I shared with you my story, I did not have the best of reactions, but still understood that it was much bigger than that. And I remember when it was up for vote in California to legalize cannabinoids. The first time I voted no, and the second time I voted yes. And I'll tell you what changed my mind. It was partially because I saw the medicinal qualities and how it's helped many people that I know, especially this particular friend of mine that I referenced. But I also thought to myself, how many young kids are being criminalized? And it's on the record. And how many of those young kids or young adults come from harsh neighborhoods or disadvantaged backgrounds? And I wasn't condoning, I'm not saying they should be breaking the law or doing what they were doing, but I was thinking to myself how their lives were impacted versus someone who came from a more affluent background that may have been caught with possession and was able to get scot-free. I kept on doing research in terms of how many people were criminalized and their backgrounds versus the people that were not. And I started to think to myself, this is an unfair system. And it also felt like there was a possibility that there was an opportunity for this to help people, to be medicine, like you have called it. So with that in mind, can you tell us, when was it that you said, this is what I'm going to focus on? I know you said you moved to California and you decided to come into the industry, but what was it that said, you know what, I can go back to Price Waterhouse, I can do XYZ, but I think this is really it for me?
Yeah, you have to make a decision to come out of the closet in a way. And I remember distinctly going into my LinkedIn and actually posting in my LinkedIn that I am the CEO associated with the cannabis industry. And I knew there was no way back. Once I posted and I created it, and I thought it was legitimate business. And I know there's stigma associated with that, but this was my decision. And being in the dispensary space, I was a partner in dispensaries, and I saw these patients, you're mentioned briefly. I saw people that had legitimate conditions, diseases, cancer, autism, epilepsy, and I could see how they're consuming cannabis and it's addressing their symptoms. I had a friend of mine that had epilepsy and was on all kinds of prescription medications, and the license was taken away, and was so scared that she was going to have an episode, and eventually got rid of the medication and started using cannabis as her medication. So when I started seeing this, and I went on LinkedIn and actually listed my new job title, my new company, and medicinal cannabis and all that, that was the moment that was, the genie's out of the bottle, there's no putting it back in kind of thing. And that was it. I made that decision because I fought for legalization for so long. But moving to California, it was an interesting transition because, you mentioned AIDS, and the reason why the cannabis industry exists the way it is due to the AIDS patients. They were the biggest activists back in the 80s because what happened was Richard Nixon created this whole schedule of narcotics. And he actually said the reason why he's scheduling cannabis, even though he didn't listen to his own advisors, his own doctors, the reason why he's scheduling cannabis is to be able to, crush the hippies and the Jewish media and the urban youth who are using it, he wanted to get them in jails and then crush their spirits and everything you talked about. And then Reagan actually came in and extended that war on drugs, actually made it a war, even though they were arming, using that money to arm, rebels in different countries and selling arms and all that stuff. But one of the things they started doing was looking at privatizing prisons. So they made this a business, as you were alluding to. But what happened was in the early stages of AIDS patients, the side effects of the medication was they couldn't eat, they couldn't hold down their food, they were losing a lot of weight, all these different things. And there were several people who were going into the hospitals, Brownie Mary, Dennis Perron, and they were actually giving cannabis to these AIDS patients. And they were pioneers, and they were instrumental on changing law. The first law that was changed in this country is in California. In 1996, we had a Prop 215, which was the Compassionate Use Act, and an SB 420. So we had medicinal cannabis here forever, but the way that was done is it's a collective. So meaning that, Cindy, you're going to be our grower. There's 5 of us in here. So it took, how much did it cost you? Your cost was about $30 to grow this cannabis. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to give you $30. You can't profit from me, but this is what your labor costs. So it's an exchange of goods for service with a not-for-profit categorization, which made no sense whatsoever. But that's the way we started. And what you voted on was recreational cannabis or adult use. So that is non-medicinal with a medical card, with a doctor, with all that stuff, because the state realized that, people are getting it anyway, so we might as well tax it. And that's where I think this industry sort of went a little bit off, because recreational cannabis, it's still a drug, even though I'm in the industry, sort of ancillary, but I'm a proponent. It really is a drug. It needs to be regulated. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be like a supplement that I would get in in my supplement store. I know if I'm buying a product in Los Angeles and I'm going to buy the same product in Philadelphia, it's going to be consistent. It has test results from a lab. I know what I'm putting in my body. But with cannabis, it's still not clear because every state has their own rules and regulations. And until we have a federal system that actually regulates and mandates the quality, I think everybody should get whatever they want. But you have to have safety, then efficacy, and make sure the quality is standard throughout. So I'm not a fan of like big government getting involved, but you have to have regulations in order for this industry to move to the next level as legitimate medicine.
I want to make sure I understood what you're saying. So what you're trying to tell us is, yes, there is the recreational use, and you're saying that's fine. Recreational use is fine. However, there's the medicinal component. And if we are going to treat this like medicine, there has to be some sort of standardized quality control so that whatever you purchase anywhere that it's legal in the United States, you're getting the same product like you would with any supplement.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. You need a governing body to be able to create regulations on standards. So everything is created in a CGMP facility across the board. So good manufacturing practices. There's third-party testing that's testing the same way you would do for, a multivitamin or vitamin C. That it's vitamin C. There's a third party test on there, and it tells you what the percentage is, and you can be confident. Nobody questions. Does it really have 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C? You go into your vitamin shop, you don't question that. Well, cannabis, we do. The recreational or the medicinal side, to me, I don't really see a difference in that. Everybody who's of age, whatever the age may be, it was decided it's 21. You should be able to get whatever you want to get because it's your life. You should be able to do whatever you want to do. You can make your own decisions, in my opinion. But if you're going to go into a store, in your pharmacy or in your dispensary, which I don't even agree that should be the way that should be cannabis, but you go into your store and you're going to buy your product, you should know that you're buying good quality, safe products, not with pesticides, not with heavy metals, not with any foreign substances. And what's on the label you can be assured that it's accurate because it's been third-party tested. And that's what I'm saying. And until we get there, we're behind. And there's different parts of the world that are looking at doing that. I mean, Germany has a federal system. Switzerland has a federal system. Brazil has a system. The idea is that you create a standard, and what people use it for should not matter to the individual. It's my choice. If I want to get an over-the-counter product or I want to use it as a supplement, they have medical food products. Nobody's telling me I should take my vitamin D. Do I take my vitamin D as my supplement every day, or do I take it when I have a condition of some sorts? That's up to me to decide. And that's what I'm trying to convey.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on something you said earlier. So you said that you don't believe the way to obtain this is through dispensaries. How do you believe it should be obtained?
I believe it should be obtained in pharmacies. So there should be an over-the-counter product, the same way you get your ibuprofen or anything else, or the same way you get your supplements. Pharmacies, supplement stores, there should be a way to be able to get it. Now, there is also a level maybe that's above that. So maybe there's this prescription grade, and then you can go and make sure that you write a prescription, because what you were talking about, adverse experiences and stuff, a lot of it has to do with dosing. So there may be a standard dose that's a higher CBD, lower THC, and that's my supplement. But if I have a specific condition, there's Tylenol with codeine, right? So you can't buy Tylenol with codeine over the counter. You have to go and ask the pharmacist for that. So maybe there's different levels that you can get that are more specific for a certain condition.
Fascinating. You're giving us so much to think about. With that said, is this where you think the future of the industry is going, where we can purchase this over the counter and a lot of the stigma around it will be addressed once we say this is regulated and we can buy it over the counter, as well as prescriptions based on your body type, whatever medications you're on, and so forth?
Yeah, if I had a crystal ball, and if anybody asked me, like, go ahead, create policy. First of all, I believe in personalized medicine as a whole. This is a bigger answer to your question, but I'm going to get to that specific one. Why were we always told, take two of these? Take two of these. It doesn't matter what your size is, how big you are, how small you are. It's always take two of these. And nobody ever questioned a doctor that tells you to take this medication. And then there's interactions between these different medications. And I was always concerned about that, because my grandfather, when I was a kid, had a bunch of strokes. And I remember my grandmother and my mom would sit there with doctors every few weeks and go through their 2 bags of medications. And this medication interacts with this one, and this one needs more dose and less dose. And it's like, well, can't you find out some of that in advance to say, for this person, it's this much, for this person, it's this much? So I'll give you an example. In Israel, which was one of the first countries that created an actual medical system for cannabis, thousands of people, I think 35,000 people went through the program, and they get prescribed cannabis, and they get a certain chemical variety, and then they have to report back efficacy. So it's, trying to measure the efficacy, how well it's working. But the one thing they came out with this green book. So this green book told everybody how to dose. So it's milligram per kilogram of weight. Well, if you experiment with this, so my business partner is a larger man than me. He's taller, he weighs more, is bigger. If he and I would take the same exact amount of THC, which we have, will be a completely different experiences. First of all, I'm a normal metabolizer of THC and an ultra rapid metabolizer of CBD. He is a slow metabolizer of THC. He and I take the same amount, we will have completely different experiences. I will have a normal experience of euphoria, whatever I expect, and he will have a very intense experience. In addition to that, you have genes that are associated with anxiety, for instance, stress reactivity. So if you're under duress and you know this about yourself, you can epigenetically trigger the expression of those genes as well. So, and I'll give you an example, and this is going back to our test and how it works. And I didn't forget your question about the distribution, but The way that our test works and why this is important is it's about precision medicine. So right now, we genotype or sequence about 675,000 genetic biomarkers, which are called single nucleotide polymorphisms. This is not just for your cannabis. This is for your endocannabinoid system in your body. So we can show you have potential vitamin deficiencies, potential nutrient deficiencies, and potential adverse effects. And this could be triggered by phytocannabinoids. So I'll give you an example. There's a gene called FA, fatty acid amide hydrolase. This gene is a very important gene because it produces an enzyme that actually breaks down anandamide. And if we remember, anandamide is a bliss hormone that's secreted by our brain and also secreted when we consume THC. So in an event of stress, let's say that I'm walking down the street and a car comes out and almost hits me. So we have this fight or flight that everybody knows. There's neurochemicals that are excreted in our bloodstream right away. There's some dopamine, there's some adrenaline, there's some norepinephrine, there's some cortisol. Now, when your brain realizes no lion chasing the jungle, it says, okay, now it's time to get your body back to balance, homeostasis. So there's a reuptake of those neurochemicals, and your brain is going to release new neurochemicals. And one of them happens to be anandamide and also some TAG. But if this gene gives you an enzyme that metabolizes anandamide. So if you are metabolizing more anandamide than the average person, you're actually secreting less of your own so that cortisol can stay in your bloodstream longer. And what happens? So number one, it can lower your pH, so make you more acidic. So your immune system can overreact to that. And when your immune system overreacts to that, we experience inflammation and pain. And we usually experience that in our joints, or ankles, or knees, or hips, neck, back, etc. And if we have predisposition to gut health issues, it can start moving into your gut health. So my mom always told me, maintain your stress level. Stress is the root of all diseases. And I was like, okay, I agree, but how? How does it work? Well, one of the way it works is because you have this cortisol that's in your system and your immune system is overreacting to that. So because you have this deficiency in your own production of anandamide, you can subsidize with the plant. When you subsidize just enough, perfect. The issue is that THC is a very narrow therapeutic window. So if you take a little bit, it may not even work for some people. When you take too much, it actually triggers stress reactivity, PTSD, all these different things, and people can have a very adverse experience. So you have to find a sweet spot, the narrow therapeutic window where THC works on. And if you know how people metabolize, your genetic predispositions, you can hone in and create a real, true, precision, personalized protocol. And that includes what are my nutrients that I need to take? What do I do with my diet? If I have a predisposition, low iron levels, I know this about myself, and I'm going to switch to being a vegan, well, maybe that's something I need to subsidize for. We have the system, our DNA. We have the ability to use that as our GPS system of life. I kind of tell people, if I'm driving from LA to Kentucky, I will eventually get there with no GPS. I will eventually get there. I'm going to hit some potholes around on the road. I'm going to, go with some traffic jams, etc. But I'm going to get there. But if I have a GPS unit, it's going to help me navigate around those potholes. It's going to help me navigate around that. So that's what you use your DNA for. And then you measure what's being expressed, the epigenetic expression of that. And that's sort of what the reason for doing this. And when I talk about, to answer your question, long-winded way to answer your question about dispensaries and distribution and recreational, I'm not a believer of recreational drugs. The word doesn't make any sense. It's adult use. You are an adult, you should make your decision. But the challenge is when these states become recreational states, I, as a person who needs medicine, go into a dispensary, wherever's providing me that medicine, and I have very little to choose from. The reason why is now that it's recreational, I have all these concentrates, and concentrates are a concentrated form of THC products. So your average flower, THC flower, is probably in about 20% THC. These concentrates that people are vaping or administering in different ways, you're looking at 60, 70, 80% THC. So people are experiencing a lot more of these adverse effects. I was on a show with an older gentleman, and he goes, "Oh, back in the day, we'd smoke a joint. I equate like smoking a joint to a beer." And I'm like, not anymore. If you smoke a whole joint, you'll be under this console, because the THC that you used to get, it's maybe 8%, maybe a little bit around that. But now you're in the 70, 80%. So it's a completely different experience. And this juxtaposition of having recreational and medicinal, and people who actually need the medicine go into these shops, they're having a very hard time finding.
If I understand correctly, what you're doing at Endocanna Health with this testing, people are able to find out what their genotype is, what their predisposition is, so that when they do go and purchase the medicine, they know what to purchase versus going in cold turkey and getting something that will be disruptive to their system, like what I experienced. So what we want to do is avoid that. Now there's the science and the technology to do that through a company such as yours.
It's exactly it. So to simplify it, is the way that it's done is it's a buccal swab. So you swab the inside of your cheek. We're HIPAA GDPR compliant. It's the test is actually called EndoDNA. You would then register and you ship the sample to our lab. Take a couple of weeks to get your results. But if you've already taken like a 23andMe or Ancestry.com, you can take your results from that test, upload it to our portal, we'll translate it, and we'll provide you a result in 30 seconds without a swab.
Wow.
And the idea is it's not only giving you, what you should take, it's a roadmap on what the things you should avoid. First of all, what you should avoid will help you focus on what's your sweet spot. So I'll give you the cannabinoid and terpene profile that's more aligned to your genetics. Number two, it's about how much you take. What's the dose? Well, dose is based on metabolic function, maybe method of consumption. If you're a poor metabolizer on first pass because your liver converts THC to a different substance, maybe consume sublingually, so under your tongue, so you can bypass your liver. Also, drug interactions, which are hugely important. What if you're taking blood thinner medication? There's an interaction even with CBD. And then the way that we guide people on what products, we can take the test results from a product, run that through an algorithm, and show you what the percentage of match is for that specific product and geofence that. So you can take that information, or you can go to a dispensary with, can you show me the products that are 1-to-1 with linalool and beta-carotene alpha as your primary and secondary terpene profile? And that's sort of the future. And that's cannabis or phytocannabinoids. We're doing the same thing in whole genome. So we can show you predisposition of vitamin deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies, skin conditions. We have a mental health test that looks at treatment-resistant depression. These are people that may not want to consume SSRIs because it's not going to work for them, but they'll still experience all the side effects from SSRIs. Maybe look at other alternative methods. Binding affinity to different pathways, serotonin, GABA, dopamine. There's different types of drugs that are associated with those as well. It really is about having a collaborative experience with your healthcare professional. You're doing your DNA testing. You're having a recommendation of products from your healthcare professional that are tailored and geared to you. We're not individualized yet. Individual is when AI takes over and starts making your personalized compounding pharmacy drugs, which is happening now. I just got my vitamins personalized to me. So in my gel capsule, I have 14 different vitamins in it, one capsule. So I have to take 2 times a day, customized to me with my own name, my prescription. So instead of taking all my 14 one by one, I take one capsule. So this is all coming. And the main part of this is tracking the efficacy. How do you know that it's working for you? Well, you can do an epigenetic test, which tests methyl groups, methyl donors, and then you can actually attach your wearable device or your phone. What is my heart rate variability changing? My blood oxygen level, all these different things we can track. And then we can send that information seamlessly to the cloud, and the machine learning algorithm, AI, is going to start making better predictive inferences. So now we know that I'm a person who's a poor metabolizer, a good metabolizer. So my food, my allergens, my vitamins, everything, what I put on my skin, it's going to be customized and personalized to me. That's the future.
I appreciate how much you're speaking about tracking and data, so that assessments can be made. How is it that we can track this? Would it be through a smartwatch? Would it be through some type of app or program that you have? How would people track their reactions to what has been recommended for their genotype based on DNA expression?
Right now, it's two ways, but there's going to be a third and fourth way. So today, it's patient-reported outcomes. So we have an app. The app, basically, when you start, you fill out. Let's say it's you're going to take cannabis for inflammation relief. So probably your healthcare professional is going to ask you to fill out a PEG-3, which is a standard. Where does it hurt? Here. What's your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? Same thing. That's a baseline. You fill out your health profile. Then we're going to ask you, based on the protocol that you received, how is that working for you? Same thing. Well, how's your pain now? And we're going to continue to ask that. In addition to that, we also integrate your wearable device. So as you mentioned, it can be your Garmin, your Fitbit, all those different things. Eventually, what's going to happen is your machine learning, your AI, is going to start communicating with your phone and is going to send the signals to the cloud to do that. And we already have a patent on the machine learning and our technology to do that also. But the future is going to be completely seamless. You're not going to have to report anything because your wearable device, your phone, anything else is going to constantly monitor you for changes in your vitals, in your heart rate variability, in your blood oxygen level, all these different things, and monitor your sleep. So we have Oura Ring now, a bunch of devices to monitor your sleep. So if you're taking a product to help you sleep, how do you know it's working for you? Well, you can open up your app in the morning and say, okay, I had this much delta sleep. I had this much theta sleep. I had this much alpha sleep. So the quality of sleep you can actually measure today. And if something is off, it can send a signal and say, hey, we need to increase, decrease, change. And this will be a learning system. The more people that use it. And by the way, for your listeners, all the information is anonymized. So we are gathering data, but we don't care to market to Cindy. You're getting a number that's associated with you. So yes, we want to know that 1,000 people that have your similar genotype have taken this protocol and showed efficacy. More people can benefit from that, but it's not about your own personal information that remains anonymized. That's what I think the future will be. There's one more test, and I had a mentor that told me one time, said, okay, that's great. Genetics, great. Show me on a cellular level that something is happening. So there's another way to be able to do that, several different ways. There's something called RNA that you can measure, and there's also something called methylation. So methylation, you can actually see if there is an expression. So you have genetics. We have these genetic predispositions we're born with. We get half of our genes from our mother, half from our father, and those are genetic coding, basically. And what happens is some of them, when we're born, they're turned on. So like our eye color, our skin color, our hair color, all that is turned on. The rest of them can be turned on or off based on lifestyle. So how we live our lives can turn those on. So if we're exposed to heavy metals or we're exposed to, nuclear waste, something like that, it can actually mutate some of those expressions. But based on your genetic predisposition, let's say that somebody has a predisposition to alcohol dependence. Well, if you go your life and not drink alcohol, it's not going to get triggered. But if you don't know this about yourself and you consume alcohol, it'll turn that switch on. So understanding what needs to be turned on or off is based on your genetics, and your epigenetics is a measurement of what's turned on. Some things we never want to turn on. If we have a predisposition to a cancer or something like that, we want to know about it and make sure that we do everything we can not to turn that on. But some things we need to turn on. And this is the black box that's being unraveled for people today. And that's the future of medicine. It's personalized to you and me.
Fascinating. I love how detailed you've been with us and how you've explained the science, because I do think that it takes away the urban legend of cannabinoids is this or that. You're like, no, this is the data, this is the science, this is what we're doing, this is what we're collecting. And it's really groundbreaking what you're doing in terms of working with our genome and our DNAs. We've had an opportunity to hear about your journey in terms of your why you got interested in cannabinoids as medicine. We've been able to hear about your company. We've been able to hear about the data and the science and how you're working with it to try to give people the most personalized experience possible, also knowing there's more to come. But there's also an element of courageousness, if you will. And I'm thinking back to what you said earlier, that when you changed your LinkedIn profile, you knew there isn't any going back. And I think that we need more courage in this world. Sometimes we like what is comfortable, what is the status quo. And yet, when you have the courage to go against the grain, to do something a little bit different, that's where the magic is at. That's when we experience innovation. And you did that when you said, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm not going back. I'm going to do it. So my next question to you is a little bit more personal. How has your life changed since you did it in terms of you, Len, as a person, not so much as a professional, but as a person?
It's freeing. And thank you for saying that. It's really a way to be able to connect with who you really are. Mm-hmm. And, even going back with my parents, when I worked at PW or PWC, you wear a suit. I know it's hard to believe I used to have long hair, and I used to take my earrings out and put my hair back in a ponytail. And I felt like I was wearing a costume. Like it was a version of me. There was something in me, but it wasn't me. Mm-hmm. And at some point I sat down, maybe it was after a Tony Robbins event or some of that. I sat down and try to figure out what would I do? What do I want to, regardless if I get paid for it, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about art. So am I going to make money? I mean, I tried a little bit, but it's not really, I paint for fun. Music. Okay, great. I dabble a little bit of music, but if I get to go to concerts and see live music, that satisfies that need. And cannabis. And I was like, cool. If I can combine those and just do those things, it'll make me happy. And then I think it's this notion of fear. And we get paralyzed by being afraid to make a mistake, to do something wrong, to fail. And I just don't believe, I think maybe I got a lesson when I was kicked out and I was homeless, and I was living in motel rooms, and I was couch surfing. And by going through my life and knowing that I'm resilient, I can overcome just about anything, it removes that level of fear. And then you push yourself a little bit more and more. I was in Brazil not that long ago, and I don't like heights. It always bothered me. It was like, and then I went up to this mountain, and I ended up hang gliding off this mountain. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, the person I was tethered with is like, okay, we're going to run. We're going to run in tandem, and we're going to keep running. And if we don't run, we're going to fall. That's basically it. You run or you fall. And then he gave me this analogy. He goes, you like cartoons? I'm like, yeah, I love cartoons. He goes, remember when, Roadrunner or Wile E. Coyote, when they were running off the mountain and they kept running in the air and they realized, oh shit, and then they dropped. So he goes, when you're going to run off the platform, take 2 more steps in the air. I'm like, okay. Well, guess what? We're not cartoons. When we run off the platform, we drop. But there's a moment, like split second, where you drop and that fear comes up, mm-hmm. and then you're up and you're like, oh, I'm flying. That little second is like that hesitation. So if you can overcome and overstep that level of that voice telling you why you shouldn't do something, just quiet it and do it anyway. And when you do it, it doesn't matter. You fail, you succeeded. It's the momentum of actually doing something. And that's sort of, teach my daughter that, and, people who work with me. So my life has changed where I feel free because mm-hmm. I'm doing something that I want to do. And I have my own company, which I have a issue with authority. So working for other people is very difficult for me anyway. I have to kind of do my own thing. And then you collaborate with brilliant people. We're bringing in amazing scientists doing clinical trials at Harvard Medical School. Like the stuff that we're involved with, I pinch myself every day. I'm like, I cannot believe that I actually do this, because as you mentioned, people went to jail for cannabis. I mean, the amount of stuff that I've seen and I have to navigate through, and now, you have companies making billions of dollars off this. It just it came full circle. So I'm super grateful.
Nice. I love it. And I think there's another element that it's also worthwhile to note is that in this freedom, you also find authenticity. And I think that when you're in this authentic place, because you're free, you're able to show up and be the best leader you can be. I think that's when you truly inspire people. Sometimes people are very focused on having a vision, which is important. It's very important. But equally important is who we are and how we show up. And if we show up fearless, I think that coupled with vision, with your why, is one of the most potent ways to be a leader and to inspire people. I see that happening with you and with your company, and it's inspirational. So as we're getting ready to close up, I'd like to ask you two more questions. One is, where can people go to find out more information about your company? And the second question is, what advice can you give to leaders and rising leaders in their prospective industries in terms of letting go of that fear?
Yeah, people can find more information. Our website's EndoDNA, ENDODNA.com. I'm Len, Len at EndoDNA. I'm on all social. I think Len May DNA is on Instagram and Len May and the other platforms. I'm accessible. I'm out and about, and I speak all over the world on this subject. So yeah, reach out. And I also have a podcast, as you mentioned, Everything is Personal. I have a book. It's called Making Cannabis Personal. You can get it on Amazon, wherever you get books. Advice is interesting because to me, it's one thing that I think, and people who are in business really understand, we can't do this on our own. We need good people around us. And I think what gets lost, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too, we're so focused on the business aspect. We have to generate revenue. We have shareholders, all this other stuff. You miss the personal connection with the people. And it's all about the people that work with you and taking your passion, what you have in you, why you're doing what you're doing, and instilling that passion into every single individual. And like when we interview people, I talk to my business partner, about he's reviewing resumes and all that stuff. I'm like, that's all great. I've interviewed so many people in my life, and there's an intangible. This intangible is the passion and the willingness to be open to learn and figure things out on your own. This ability, it's innate, and a resume isn't going to show you that. And you as a leader, anybody is a leader, your job to connect to your own emotional intelligence, to be grateful for the people that are actually helping you rise, because everybody rises. But that connection with the individuals, so everybody's aligned. It's sort of like mycelium in mushrooms. There's a communication between everybody, but you only see this one mushroom. It's the ability for everybody to be in tune and in line and connected to that passion and purpose. Now you're going to be able to grow as a company. So that's my advice.
Thank you. I fully agree with everything you said. And my favorite is emotional intelligence, which of course is related to having self-awareness, because when you're aware of yourself, then you start to become aware of those around you and you can create those connections. Len, it's been a complete pleasure and honor having you on PreZence. Thank you for everything that you shared of yourself, everything that you taught us. It's been a joy.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on PreZence. For more information on how you can create greater levels of impactful presence in your professional and personal life, visit www.cindyurrutia.com and follow me on social media. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. feel free to post a comment and we'll read it on the show.